Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled and pleased to have with me as my guest Irene Liu, who's a former general counsel, now an executive coach, an executive in residence, corporate counsel's GC of the year. Irene, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Richard, for having me.
So, Irene, you've got an incredibly unusual background. You're obviously a lawyer, but you've gone on to do some really interesting things. Why don't you start by just telling me a little bit about your legal background and what you did as a lawyer?
So I've done many things in my legal career. It first started out in the government. So instead of following the traditional path of going to a law firm, I wanted to go into the government because I had seen what corporate life is like. So before law school, I worked in investment banking and I had seen what corporate life is like and I knew what it entailed. And at the end of the day, I wanted a fulfilling career where I was able to give back in some way from a public interest perspective. And many of us go to law school because of that very reason. And so I started out my career first as an honors attorney at the US Department of Justice in the Antitrust Division, doing both civil and criminal antitrust.
Hmm.
And after doing that, I then went to the FTC and worked in Consumer Protection Division. And after working at these two phenomenal agencies, I wanted to take my experience in-house into tech. I
Hmm.
had always known that I wanted to be in business. And so I went carrying this experience to BlackBerry back in the day when people were using BlackBerry, Richard.
I
Um,
remember.
yeah, I don't know if you remember, but it was a very popular
Of
handheld device for
course.
those of you that are younger and do not know. But I joined it at its peak, and it was an amazing experience. I traveled all over the globe representing BlackBerry in front of regulators in Australia, Indonesia, Madrid, London, you name it. And it was such an amazing experience. But at the same time, we all know what happened with BlackBerry.
Yeah, right.
And sadly, it was just not it didn't have the future that I had hoped. And so ultimately, I decided to go in-house to a smaller startup. I was living in the Bay Area at the time in San Francisco. And it was at the time when San Francisco was starting to thrive with startups. Twitter started to come into the city, and I managed to find a really great small startup called Lookout, where I became the associate general counsel and built my in-house career at startups from there.
Huh.
So after that, I then went to Checker and became the general counsel, where I oversaw not only legal, but finance and customer education. Then went to lead an in-house function at Hopin, which was a virtual events company. And I was the chief legal officer there and also grew into the CFO as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, each one of those companies sound amazing because you did one of them during the pandemic, right? And then you joined BlackBerry at its peak when, it was going to take over the world. So those are pretty interesting. But you've obviously now you've taken all your legal experience and packaged it in a different way and trying to do different things. So tell me how you repackaged all that knowledge and experience you've had.
So what I'm really passionate about is giving back. Like starting from my career after law school, going into government, I think it's important to share knowledge and share best practices and be helpful. And so one of the things that I realized about my career is that I had this phenomenal GC career at Checker. I helped grow that company from 60 to 600 people to multi-billions in valuation, and Hopin as well. It was a phenomenal company that grew incredibly fast. And so from a growth perspective, at both companies, I experienced hypergrowth.
Hmm.
At Hopin, I also experienced the other side of hypergrowth, which is also unfortunate. We did 3 rounds of layoffs in 2022. And so I knew that my 6 years of GC tenure, while it may seem short to some, it was filled and it was very eventful. And so
Wow.
the experiences that I garnered in 6 years is probably what most people see in a decade of being a general counsel. And so what I wanted to do was share that experience in some way. And so I ended up getting an executive leadership coaching certificate
Hmm.
and decided to really start coaching and mentoring other general counsels as well as senior executives, because in-house roles, what I realized once I've sat in the role at the top is that it's not the substance that keeps you up there. It's really the EQ at the end of the day. And so I wanted to make sure that people understood that and to help, especially women and minorities that often struggle with those traits of the EQ traits, the executive presence,
Mm.
however people frame it, and to really help others thrive at their C level as well as their senior roles.
So tell me a little bit about the kinds of, the typical kind of advice that you might give, or what are the things that you frequently come across that people struggle with as you talk about executives that make it hard at that C-suite level?
What's amazing is that even people at the C-suite level, and they work so hard to get there, is that they all still struggle to a certain degree with imposter syndrome.
Mm,
And people talk about this, and we read a lot of articles about it, but it is real. And a lot of people struggle with it. And
mm,
especially women, minorities struggle with it even more. And so it is helping to build confidence in their skill set,
mm,
embracing a mentality, a growth mindset,
mm,
essentially.
mm,
So I see some elements of imposter syndrome. I also see people that are sort of stuck, that are trying to figure out how to do more with less, especially in this economic environment. So there's a
mm,
lot of pressure and there's a lot of regulations that are coming in left and right in this climate at this point. And so a lot of general counsels as well as senior executives are feeling pressured. So how do you set boundaries? How do you prioritize? How do you communicate with your C levels about what you can and cannot do? And
mm,
obviously, we always say never say no, but at the same time, you have to draw some sort of boundary. So how do you prioritize and position that in a yes way?
mm. Do you advise non-lawyers? Is it about the same? What is the percentage of lawyers versus non-lawyers that you're coaching, would you say?
Yeah, oftentimes also non-lawyers come to me as well too, because I've seen G&A in
Mm,
many ways. So I consider my expertise beyond legal. And so
yeah.
I've again overseen the finance function. And with all of the companies that I've worked at, I've worked very tightly with the people team. And I'm currently advising a Sempervirens, which is also a VC that has a lot of HR elements to it. And so
Mhm,
I view these
mm,
three functional teams as really core to GNA. And so I often advise around those three functions.
mm. Now, one of the other things you're doing is you're doing a lot with AI. Tell me a little bit about that.
So AI is another area that I got into mainly because Checker was an AI driven company. We were a
Mhm.
machine learning driven company at the time. So I'd always been interested in AI. And
Mm,
so, especially when Gen AI was launched in November, one of the things that I realized with my background is I have this unique background of having worked at the DOJ and in competition law and FTC and in consumer protection. And if you think about it, there aren't that many people that really understand the technology as well as the policy and really have seen it in both angles. And so one of the things that I'm doing right now is advising on these two elements because there aren't that many people that understand both deeply. And so on
mm,
the AI front as well, I'm currently an advisor to Women Defining AI as well, in addition to the AI Institute at Berkeley. And I'm
mm.
doing a lot of hands on learning myself so that I can truly understand the technology.
Yeah.
I just recently built my own custom GPT, and I'm really getting into the technology itself so that when I'm informing government or when I'm consulting companies, I can truly fluently speak about it because I've done it and I've actually hands on built things myself as well.
Yeah, interesting. Now, you're also doing stuff at Berkeley. Tell me a little about that.
I keep myself busy, which
I know. I know. Each one of these could be a full-time job, and you're doing three of them.
and I love it. I love the variety. It keeps me busy. It keeps me engaged in so many different areas that I truly enjoy. And Berkeley Law is is where I went for law school, and so I was really truly honored when they hired me on as an executive in residence. I'm the first executive in residence at the law
Hmm,
school, so they
interesting.
custom created this role for me.
Huh.
And the role that I've been doing is mostly around thought leadership and um, building their executive education program and their profile as well too. So one of the things that I've been doing is a webinar series, just like you, called Coffee Break with Irene. And what we've been doing in the first season, for example, was we interviewed a number of phenomenal general counsels. We had, even Jen Barrett from WeWork talk about her WeWork story, and we
Mm,
had Marriott GC, Ed from Restoration Hardware, now RH. We've had a number of phenomenal GCs on that first season. The second season, we had a number of other really phenomenal leaders talk about the practice of law, best practices. David
Hmm.
Latt from formerly Above the Law.
Oh, of course.
And yeah, and so we had a lot of really, and Sterling Miller, who I also adore, who writes this great in-house blog. And so we featured a number of people in season 2. And for season 3, which launched 2 weeks ago, we just featured Cecilia King from New York Times about AI and what she's seeing in DC around policy and AI.
Wow,
So
interesting.
season 3 will be focused mainly on AI. And our goal, again, with that is to really share best practices and share thoughts around what is happening around AI with experts. Um,
Interesting. Well, tell me a little about the synergy of these three things. I mean, I can see, I mean, they're sort of all related, but yet they're different. But tell me a little about what's the synergies between these three things you're doing?
Well, if you think about the synergy between all of it, is that you could see that I'm truly passionate about sharing knowledge, sharing best practices, sharing my learnings. And the other thing that I love is really connecting people too. And so
Mm-hmm.
connecting people to opportunities and also giving them a platform to build their brand as well. So I view all of the guests that I have on, just like how you have guests, you're helping to amplify their brand. You're helping to amplify what they're doing. And a lot of them are doing really phenomenal work and may not necessarily have a platform. And so I've done a number of things. In addition to the coffee break episode, before that, I did a whole webinar series with HyperGrowth GCs, where I featured GCs of very fast growing companies so that people can learn from hypergrowth and how to prepare in a hypergrowth setting.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the things that I'm doing, from executive coaching to thought leadership to AI, a lot of that is driven by my passion to share knowledge, learnings, best practices, and um, really help others as well as help them raise their profile.
Now, when you talk about these three things, I can't help but get the feeling like you had this plan all along, and this is what you were going to go towards. Is that the case, or were you really just thinking you were going to become, GC to GC to GC, and then this sort of happened?
So when I look at my career, I realized that I had been sprinting pretty much all my life. I immigrated from Korea. I had to learn English quickly. Um, went to college, and then I decided to go into banking. Everyone was going to investment banking before tech days. Everyone went to either management consulting or investment banking. I thankfully had investment banking career. And so I was sprinting towards that. And then 9/11 happened. And obviously, there were 5 rounds of layoffs in my first job out of college. And I realized that was not the right role for me. And so I then went to law school. But since then as well, I decided, well, maybe I need to pivot and sprint towards my next goal. And maybe that's the Asian mentality in me, that I just needed to do what is best in moving up. And so I viewed my career in a linear way, which is sort of a short-sighted way of looking at the career at that time. But when I went in-house, I realized general counsel is the highest role, so why not aim for that? And so I naturally aimed for it and sprinted towards that. And I became general counsel within 10 years of graduating from law school, which is relatively young
Mhm.
at the time. And then what I realized is I had sprinted, I'd seen a lot, but at the end of the day, when I looked at my next role after a hop in, it could be another general counsel
Right.
career, or I could do something totally different. And as you can see from all the things that I've done, I just truly love learning.
Mm,
Learning is something that is very important to me. And
mm,
I knew that if I went to become a general counsel of a similar sized company or a similar opportunity, I wasn't necessarily going to learn. It was just an
right.
opportunity to make money. And I've come from humble beginnings. And so I know that like money doesn't necessarily bring me happiness, and it's really just joy in what I do. And so I
Mm,
wanted to pivot and use my career in a different way,
mm,
especially while
mm.
the market is not that strong, anyways. So I'm not foregoing on that many opportunities. And so
Yeah,
to a
you're right.
certain degree, I decided maybe this is the time for me to truly explore my passions.
Mm,
I never had the time to do that because I've been sprinting. I also have 2 little kids. I have 2 boys that are 9 and 11, and I wanted to also be available to them too. And so I took this conscious decision
mm,
to try to jog, as I call it, instead of sprinting, and use this time to really explore various opportunities and see which doors open ultimately.
Yeah. Would you say you're having more fun or enjoying this period more than, I mean, I'm sure you enjoy being a GC and working in the government, all the things you've done. Would you say you're enjoying this more than that, or what would you say?
I have to say, I've loved every part of my career and I have no regrets about any of the choices that I've made.
Yeah.
But I'm truly loving what I'm doing now. And I think what's sort of cool is that people, even if they don't see me just from the LinkedIn posts and the things that I'm doing, they tell me, wow, you look so happy. You look so um, happy doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And they find it also really inspiring to see someone take such a different path and find joy in it.
Yeah, totally. Well, what if like the perfect company came along and invited you to be their GC again? Would you ever consider that?
And I'm very grateful that I do have opportunities that come my way.
Yeah.
And what I've always said is I have a very distinct goal. And, when I think about my GC career, I've always said, and I've worn so many hats within a company. So if it's a smaller company, I've always said I want it to be a GC plus role. Maybe it's a COO type role. If it's a larger company, I can potentially consider a GC role, but it has to be much larger such that I'm learning along with it. Maybe it's a
Yeah.
public company, something different. And it's an element where the learning piece is so crucial to me that if it is the same old, it's not something that's interesting to me. And I would rather continue learning at my own pace,
Mm,
which has been a faster jog too within this time too. And so I'm just having so much joy learning right now that it has to be an amazing learning opportunity for me to
mm,
consider
mm,
going back
mm,
as another
mm,
general counsel.
mm. Well, with what you're doing right now, do you have any particular goals right now? Like, are you working towards maybe writing a book, or is there any other kind of larger goal, or you're just kind of seeing where these three things that you're doing now kind of lead?
Yeah, I'm just keeping myself open to opportunities. And um maybe that's unwise and who knows, but looking back, I think I want to give myself this time. And
Yeah.
so even last year, everyone that knew me, they knew that I was taking a 1 year of adventure. I called it a year of adventure. And now it's actually become 2 years. And so, but I took that conscious decision. Like I said, I'm going to take 1 year of adventure and I'm going to decide in the fall whether I'm going to do something different, go back in house, or whether to continue doing what I'm doing. And I realized in the fall, I had another conversation where there was a company that wanted me as a general counsel. And I was talking to a friend of mine and was like, you don't look that excited talking about this opportunity. Which is why, it just validated for me that I needed that like learning opportunity, something different. And it also validated to me how important it is to have a sounding board, a coach. And so I love that I'm able to play that role for others. And I'm also grateful that I have mentors and friends that can play that role for me too.
Yeah.
And so that's why I decided to continue this path and I'm going to continue it. And my goal is to see what happens. One of the things, especially with AI right now, I think that there's a lot of opportunities there that I'd like to really understand, whether it's going back into the government or going to help influence some way around AI and regulations. So those are some of the things that I'm exploring right now.
Yeah. Well, Irene, I really appreciate your taking the time to share your story with me. You haven't had an amazing legal career and you look like you're really enjoying what you're doing. So I really appreciate your taking the time to tell me about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting me to share my story. Really appreciate it.
Totally. This is Richard Hsu and Irene Liu. Thanks.
Thanks.